Hi, everyone, and welcome to my session Beyond the Hype, Developing a Critical Lens on AI. Hi, everyone, and welcome to my session called Beyond the Hype, a critical lens on AI in language education. Now, before I get started, I would like to say thank you to the organizers of this wonderful event for your kind invitation for me to speak at the International Conference of Second Language Studies. It's been a real pleasure to prepare this session for you. And I hope it will give you some food for thought as well as some practical ideas to take away. But first, let me briefly introduce myself because I'm not sure if everybody knows me, so that gives you a little bit of background. I'm Anna, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Auckland. My research is all about language teacher educators, and particularly from a psychological angle, I'm looking at the motivation, emotions, and the social emotional well-being. My population is not just traditional language teacher educators, those working in higher education or mainstream. I'm really interested in CELTA and Delta tutors, often freelance language teacher educators, as I am myself. So I work as a CELTA and Delta tutor. I'm also an assessor for Cambridge English. I am also a academic lead for IDP IELTS in the MENA region, meaning that I design all the teacher training materials and webinars that we give for IELTS teachers. And I'm an avid reader, blogger, presenter, and have authored two books on social emotional well-being or social emotional skills in the language classroom and trauma sensitive teaching, both with Delta Publishing. Now, if you have any questions at the end of this webinar, because I'm sadly not there, please feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect, ask me any questions, and you know where to find me. Now, I don't want to share much more because this is not about me, but I do think it's very important for you to understand where I come from when I talk about AI. So I was trained as a primary school teacher. So for me, education has always been very much holistic. Even when we work in language teaching with adults at university context level or in an academic context, I still very much believe that we don't just teach a language, we teach people. And that is the most important thing for me to be aware of, that people come to the classroom with so many other things on their minds. So we need to be aware of that. Also, I very much believe my educational philosophy is that education is not just about the qualification. It is also about developing the human being, our skills, our identity, our empathy. So it's much broader than just teaching a language. And that probably aligns with my view that learning and teaching are relational. I very much believe if we don't have good relationships or connections to our learners in the classroom, that is very, very difficult for learners to succeed because they might simply not feel safe enough in our presence. Um, and looking at technology, I think it is a beautiful tool. I'm certainly not a technophobe, but I am a little bit skeptical still about the use of AI in education. There are pros, there are cons. We talk all about that today. But for me, technology should really serve education in a way that it doesn't replace the human connection that drives learning. So this is where I come from in my view. These thoughts have really underpinned how I think about AI. And as I said, I'm not a specialist, but I do think there is a huge impact of AI on motivation and our identity. So that's what I want to look at in today's talk. I really want to quickly review the use of AI in your context. I'm based in Dubai, so it might well be different where you are. What the promises can be from AI for education, but also the challenges or the perils for education of AI. I think we all agree that we have moved from a time of frenzy, as Perez calls it, to a stage of integration. AI is everywhere in our life, in our professional context, but still we need to be aware of the challenges, and we also need to be aware of the impact of AI on our role. So that's a summary of what I like to address in this short talk. Now, if you've been in face-to-face workshops with me, you know that I very much love interactive activities. So that's not going to happen really now, but I do like you to think about a few things before I continue. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you four statements about AI, and I'd just like you to think about where do you stand? In real life, if I would be there, I would use WooClap. We could be interactive, but we don't have that facility now. But I'm sure you can have a think. Where would you stand? I also am aware that it's quite small on the screen for you to read, so I'm going to read that out. So, if we talk about the use of AI in education in relation to student motivation, does it enhance student motivation? Or do you believe that it hinders student motivation? So, enhance would be one, hinders would be five, but maybe you are somewhere, as my students would call it, so so in the middle. Have a think. Where do you stand? Then the second statement relates to the use of AI in education and agency. Does it promote agency, you think? Or do you maybe feel it reduces student agency? Again, no wrong or no right, just your thoughts. Statement number three relates to critical thinking. So, do you believe that AI helps students develop critical thinking, or maybe it lessens that critical thinking development of our students? And then the last one is about students' identity development. The use of AI either strengthens students' identity development, or you might say it hinders that students' identity development. So keep these thoughts with you. I'm not going to talk about this very much now, but throughout the session, I'll touch on these points. And at the end of the session, we'll get back to your initial thoughts. And you possibly might want to change those thoughts. So keep these thoughts with you. Um, Now, with AI, I don't think I even have to ask you anymore, do you use AI? I think nowadays, as I said, we have moved into that integration. We are no longer thinking, oh my God, FOMO, I have to catch up. We all use it. We have often rules in place and standards in place. And we maybe even have a policy in place on how to use it and how not to use it with our students, but also for our students. But I am very curious about what you use AI for and what your students use AI for. Now, I would this time love you to turn to the person next to you for 1 minute, and I know I'm not there, but I've got magic ears and magic eyes, so I can see what's happening. So please take 1 minute to share your thoughts with the person next to you, in front of you, behind you, whatever works, and share your thoughts on what you feel that you use AI for and what you feel your students use AI for. And I'm going to be quiet for about 60 seconds. Right. Sorry, I'm going to stop you if you're still talking. And I'm aware it was a very short moment to interact with the person next to you, but I hope you had a little chat. And I'm going to show you what research has shown us about the use of AI for educators, teachers in particular, and the use of AI for our students. And I think it's no surprise that, first of all, when we look at the use of AI in education, it shows research from 2026 shows that around 75% of English language teachers across 118 countries ICEF Monitor did this research. They already use AI in their work for various reasons. And please have a look and see if any of the things you discussed you can see in this slide as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of brainstorming for new ideas, lesson plans, creating assignments, adapting materials. And this research that you see here is from Microsoft that was conducted late 2025 with about 1,850 teachers of 6 different countries, two of them being the US and the UK. But I think for all of us, there's probably something in it that we think, yes, this is what we use AI for. Um, and it's really interesting, right? We use it for brainstorming. It's very useful. However, we need to be aware, and I see this happening quite a lot with my trainee teachers on CELTA and Delta, that they also use it a lot to write lesson plans for them. And this is actually a really interesting thing. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Ethan Mollick. He has written Co-Intelligence, an amazing book about the use of AI. And he warns us for the expert paradox, meaning that actually AI doesn't mean that you need to have less knowledge. It is actually the opposite. We need to be experts when we use AI so we can actually decide that the output we get given from AI works in our context or not. And I think this is one of the challenges when students start to learn how to teach or learn how to write in English without any expertise. It's very hard for them to judge if the output that AI gives them is actually appropriate for what they're using it for. So now, I don't know what your students use AI for, but here you see an overview. Again, this is from Microsoft 2025. A very interesting stat. A lot of students use it to start and brainstorm assignments. Interestingly, 22% of students also use it to finish their assignments. Now, another study from the Digital Education Council conducted in 2025, they surveyed 4,000 university students across 16 countries, and they found that 86% of students use AI in their studies actively, with 54% using it at least every week. In the UK, Happy did some research in 2026, and they stated that 94% of students use AI to help them with assessed work. The same research was done in 2024, and 47% of the students there had not used AI for assessed work at all. So you can see that actually a lot more students are using AI as well for assessed work nowadays. So that is something to be aware of for us as well. So overall, I think there are lots of valid reasons for us to use AI. It saves time. When I talk to teachers, that's often what I hear. It gives me a bit of my life back and all these admin tasks. It is actually really good at recognizing language patterns if you're working with sort of data collection. So overall, I don't know if you agree, but I do think that the impact of AI has been tremendous, and particularly in the world of education. There has been a lot of benefit for us in our jobs. When I create materials, it's much easier to create personalized learning materials. I can also create personalized learning paths because I see what my students need, what sort of exercises I could give them to support them. There is much more flexibility, not just for me and my own development, but also for my learners on learning time, where they want to study, when they want to study. Again, when I look at my own job, I can create materials that are much more accessible because I can create different scaffolds. They can listen to the text I have written initially. I could give them different tasks. So very much looking at inclusivity, gamification of content, as well as creating constructive feedback. And I think my students, when they ask AI for feedback, they're always very pleased that it might point out and correct the errors, even if they don't ask for it. But they're very pleased with the fact that AI will always say something nice. they agree, or a beautiful idea, you've really thought about that. So there's a lot of praise happening from AI for my students' work. And I think they really, really like that. The other advantage, of course, we can give conversational practice. They can actually set up a speaking task, a conversation. We have all these different bots that we can train nowadays. And the last point that I really want to address, learner anxiety or language learner anxiety has always been a thing. And I have some students who find that they actually feel a lot safer when they practice with AI than when they practice with a private tutor or with a human being. So that's really interesting. If you want to know more about this, this is taken from the British Council 2023. They published a paper on the use of AI, and this is also from the European Commission, September 2024. You can find some more details about the advantages of AI, in particular language education. Now, there's lots of advantages, but I always wonder why this drive in my classroom with my students is so huge about I love AI. I want to use AI. So I decided to prepare for this session by asking my learners, they're mostly IELTS students, there's some refugees, there's some medical doctors, why do you love AI so much? And I also have a group of GSCE students. So they are, let's say, 17, 18-year-olds ready to go to university next year. And I asked this class this particular question. What makes you love AI? Lots of different answers, but three things stood out for me. So I'm going to show you three of my students' answers. One of my students, Giovanni, says, it can do things so much quicker than me, so I have more time for the cool stuff. So he very much regards the use of AI as a time saver. And I think as teachers and educators, we can only relate to that. It's very similar for us, right? It can be more efficient than us. But if you are preparing for your English language exams, my question is, how much learning do you do yourself? Anyway, let's move on to the next person. And this is a quote from Gregor, 18, and very much, why should I even try? Because AI always writes essays or summaries better than I do. And this is interesting because this finding very much aligns with the research of Li and Ding they did in 2025 at a Chinese university. And they found that 30% of the students actually use unmodified AI-generated outputs to hand in for assessment. Well, as 40% sort of use a little bit of AI for assessed work. But herein lies a danger as well, right? Because when we look at what Gregor is saying, AI is better than he is. So he's looking for competence. However, if you hand in something that you haven't written, are you actually competent? Well, you might feel that you have succeeded, but what is the impact for your English? So this is something for us to be aware of. And for me, it was a little bit, when I spoke to Gregor, a little bit like AI is like a bag of crisps. It is around and it's too tempting to resist. And once you've opened it, you can't stop. So I don't know if that is something you recognize with your own students, but this really intrigued me. And I want to share one more quote with you. So this is Masumi's answer to that question. And for her, it was all about staying safe, still being accepted for the person she is with her errors in her English. Yeah, so for me, when I looked at the answers I had from my students, a lot of these answers for me, I couldn't help but linking back to motivational theories. And I'm pretty sure you are familiar with Ryan and Decky's self-determination theory that was developed by Ryan and Decky. And they claim that human motivation moves along a continuum from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation. Now, we all know that intrinsic motivation is more long-lasting and more important for learning. And intrinsic motivation is based on meeting three basic psychological needs. The needs we want to meet is that need of autonomy. I feel in control, and maybe that's got to do with Giovanni. I feel now much more in control of my time because I can do things quicker. I know how long it's going to take. So maybe that gives him that sense of agency. I am in control. And of course, agency or autonomy is everywhere in using all these chatbots and Copilot, Gemini, Claude, because they can choose what they ask for, when they ask for it, how they ask for it, if they access it on their tablet, their laptop, or their phone. There is so much choice that they can make themselves independently. And then, of course, the second component Ryan and Decky talk about is the sense of competence, the need to feel capable, the need to feel that you can succeed. Like Gregor said, AI is so much better than me. So actually, it makes me feel that the result I hand in to my teacher is maybe better. So the strongest motivation of using AI for learning maybe is that it can help learners write better text. It can help them gain better understanding of complex concepts or complex passages they need to read. And it can even give them feedback on their writing and they can work through it to improve that. So in a way, it makes them maybe feel that they can successfully complete the task. And then there is the third basic psychological need we have. That is that sense of the sense of relatedness. Now, relatedness often has to do with social relationships because our brain is hardwired to feel safe in a group and belong because that's how we used to survive. And Mayuni's words can be actually understood as she felt accepted for who she was, a learner who makes errors, because ChatGPT is on her side. ChatGPT has got her back. So, in a way, that really links to a feeling of feeling cared for and valued, feeling part of that safe community. And this is where I think we teachers can maybe start to think if this is what AI gives some of our learners, what are the lessons for us, right, that we can pull out of this? We have no time to talk about that, but it's one thing that I think we definitely need to consider. Now, the main thing I feel we need to consider is the impact of AI is not only positive. We all know about data privacy. We all know about hallucinations. We also know that it can be used unethically and that we have issues with plagiarism. So we're very much aware of the challenges. But I think there are also a few things that we maybe don't think of so much. And that is the fact that digital tools like AI, they are not neutral. They shape how our students see how learning happens, but they also very much shape or change who holds that power in the learning process. So for me, it's not so much about what these tools do, but it's also about how they reconfigure the roles, relationships, and the opportunities for learning in the classroom. Now, if we look at the perils of education, there are too many that you probably already know about: that cognitive offloading, using tools to reduce the mental effort. Then we have, of course, that over reliance and cognitive surrender, where students feel that the answer is always right because it came from AI, that they're not even going to check anymore. So, sort of, it's giving AI more credit than it possibly deserves because we all know about hallucinations. Then the homogenization as well, and this is an issue when we work with minority groups, when we work in underrepresented voices. Um, Typical example would be ask for an image of a doctor and a patient. 99% of the time, the doctor will be a male, often white. The patient will be a female. So the lack of creativity, really, what AI brings to education. So it takes away that creative angle on writing, on design, on all these things. And that cultural responsiveness is also very important because we know it's fed by Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic system. So there is not a lot of variety. It's all fed in English as well. And if we pull it out in a different language, there probably will be less. Then, of course, another challenge we have is that shift to individualization. We see it happening in the classroom, we see it happening at the bus stop. Everybody is sitting like that. Now, for me, this is probably one of the most worrying things. It's not just shifting our classroom community, it's actually fundamentally changing our society. And the last one for us teachers, the shift in power dynamics. Students don't have to trust anymore what we say. They always have AI to go to and double check. An example, one of my students asked about a formal letter. I told them how to start the letter, what you could put in there. And the answer was, thanks, teacher, let me check with ChatGPT. So it's really weakening or changing that dynamics. There is research in China. I think Lart did his research in China, and it was 50% of the students actually feel that AI usage in class makes them feel less connected to the teacher. And that is a real issue because if students don't feel that they trust you as a teacher, they're not going to learn. They need to feel completely safe in your presence to be able to actually open that brain for learning. So that is very much something to be aware of. So yes, I very much agree. We all need autonomy, competence, and relatedness, particularly to stay intrinsically motivated. But when we look at AI, students might perceive they get autonomy. They might perceive there's competence. They might perceive that they feel safe and a bond and trusted. However, I think we need to help our students see past these shiny objects, such as ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, whatever they use. Because actually, looking at the autonomy, looking at competence, looking at relatedness, there are a sort of paradoxes going on. So the first one is the autonomy versus efficiency paradox. Yes, AI is a time saver. You have choice to use it. So maybe that gives you an idea that it's actually you have chosen when to use it, how to use it, but who is making that decision what to write in that assignment or that essay? You're giving away your voice. And I often say to my students, you're not giving your voice away to ChatGPT. You're giving your voice away to the big tech firms. So we really need to think who is making the meaningful decisions of what to write exactly. Where is your voice? Is this actually something that you would have said, or is it ChatGPT feeding these thoughts to you? Now, the competence mirage, she has all the research in China as well, university, and they got students to write with ChatGPT, and the other group got no feedback from ChatGPT. Now, the feedback group working with ChatGPT actually significantly higher scores they received for their piece of writing. However, what happened is when they asked them, could you do this on your own? Students were not so sure. So they had a significantly lower self-perception than the group that didn't get feedback from ChatGPT, who felt much more confident in writing something independently. So that is really interesting. So AI can improve that product, but it really erodes the writer's confidence in that process. And Xi's study also showed that students who overly relied on AI had a much lower ideal self. So the ideal self is coming from the L2 motivational self system developed by Dornier in 2005. And it's very much looking at we are driven to meet our ideal self. So this is our current self, this is our ideal self. We are driven, that gap between where we are and where we want to be drives our motivation. But if you have a much lower ideal self because you think it's unachievable, you're not really going to work so hard to bridge that gap. And ChatGPT comes across as very, very, would say, a very strong writer, very organized, very easy. We're never going to be able to be as quick as ChatGPT. Why are we comparing ourselves? But students do. So it's really impacting themselves and it's really impacting them in such a way that they get a different possible future self, never as good as. So again, that self-esteem, that positive self-perception of our students is really affected. Now, you might wonder, what can we do about this? I think For us, we need to show our students that we need to look at AI from a critical perspective. And you've probably already heard of the human in the loop principle. This is not a new principle. It's from the 1940s, actually, where Wiener as research on control elements in intelligent systems said, well, there's always the need for a human to check that what has been done by the computer is correct or accurate or appropriate. So it very much means that we combine human intelligence with machine learning to create that feedback loop. But I think personally, there are three different humans in the loop. And the first one I want to introduce you to is the one with that critical lens. So the critical human in the loop who looks at the output with some questions in mind. But what does it actually say? Do I agree with what the output is presenting here? Is there anything that I think that's questionable? Is that actually true? Go and check it. Is what's written there aligned with your own beliefs and values in life? If you look at the quality, do you think it's thoughtful? Is it emotional? Is it well developed? Or is it maybe rude what you read? And then, of course, is there anything you need to fact check? Because quite often there are inaccurate references in writing, as we all know. And the last one, is it appropriate for what I want to use this text for, my context or the task I'm doing? So the human in a loop, one activity with my students I've been using is to get them to write a specific text, and they have to be really specific to the chatbot what they want to write about. So they need to give it some specific details they want to see being used. It's written, they look at it, and they're going to analyze and ask themselves a couple of questions. Are my ideas included? Is there any lexis I normally wouldn't use? Is there any grammar that's not really my voice? And to what extent does the writing actually match my style? Because I want my students to be aware of the fact that AI can change your voice. And that is really important. Last task, edit it so it actually is much more, it sounds much more like you. The second human in the loop is the reflective human in the loop. And here you could argue this is also a critical human in the loop, but I'm more or less looking at the metacognitive side of learning. So I think it's a separate control point to think for us, what did we actually learn from using ChatGPT? So what did I use? How did I use it? Why did I use it? And would I use it again? Those are very important questions because we need to figure out, what does AI use do to my learning? Or maybe what does it take away from my learning? So the last three questions, to what extent has it enhanced my work? What have I actually learned from using it? And is there anything now that I can do more independently than before I used this? So what is the learning from this use of ChatGPT or whatever AI they use? So we've got the critical human, the reflective human, and of course, there is one we should not forget. I think the effective human in the loop is really much looking at the feelings that are involved in the use of AI. In other words, what is the use of AI doing to my feelings? How does it make me feel? To what extent am I proud of what it has created for me or what it has helped me create? Do I feel that I'm becoming more confident in what I'm doing? That self-esteem we're really looking at. And to what extent is this helping me get closer to my ideal L2 self? It is a process, but the aim is that they have that picture of who they want to be and that the tool supports them in getting there, doesn't replace that person, but it really helps them get there. Yeah? So, I have no idea of, based on what I talked about today, if you want to change some of your answers of the questions we started with. But I think our students find it very motivated. However, when we look deeper, we can see that the agency, the identity, the individuality of our students can actually be negatively affected by the use of AI. Competence, it looks nice, but it could be a mirage. So how competent do we actually feel? right? And also then when we look at critical thinking, when students just copy and paste, I think we all know that can be affected. But the identity development for me as a researcher in motivation, emotions, and identity, I think that is a really big thing. So I think for me, the core question I'm going to leave you with, because I've gone over time a little bit, I'm sorry, is how do you want to position AI in your context? Do you want to position AI as something that we want our students to use for ease, short-term benefits, or is AI something we want to help our students see how they can use it for growth, which for me is a much more effective or more important area of learning because it all takes time. But if we use it in the right way, maybe not as quickly as it could do the job for us, then I think we're supporting our learners much more in that learning journey. Good. I'm going to leave you with the references, and I just want to say I hope I've given you some food for thought. And any other questions, feel free to reach out, feel free to get in touch, and have a wonderful rest of the conference. Thank you so much.